Section 15 of From the Latchkey of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. From the Latchkey of My Bookhouse, edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Hawthorne, Nathaniel. American, 1804 through 1864. The solitary figure of a boy, alone on the top of a rocky cliff overlooking the sea at Salem. The surge beating up on the shore and the vast ocean stretching away forever, now grim and gray and angry, now flashing into light with the gleam of myriad jewels. How Nathaniel Hawthorne loved the sea! His father had been a sailor before he died, and sailed far away, far, far away, to the Indies, to Africa, and Brazil. Sometimes Nathaniel said to his mother that he too would go to sea and never, never return. A shy, solitary lad was Nathaniel, fond of his own fancies, fond of his own thoughts, fond of long, lonely rambles by the sea, or through the queer little streets of Salem with their quaint old doorways and tragic memories of early witchcraft days. When Nathaniel was 14, his mother moved to a little town in Maine on the fresh, bright waters of Sebago Lake. Here the lad began again his solitary walks, exchanging the narrow streets of Salem for the boundless, tangled wilderness of Maine. He roamed the woods by day with his gun and rod, and in the moonlight nights of winter skated upon the lake till midnight, alone, always alone. When he found himself far from home and wearied with exercise, he often took refuge in some woodcutter's cabin where half a tree would be burning upon the hearth. But when Nathaniel grew up, he did not go to sea. He went to Bowdoin College instead, where he met two young men who were destined to great distinction, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and Franklin Pierce. While he was here, certain new desires must have sprouted in his heart, for he wrote home to his mother, "How would you like some day to see a whole shelf of books written by your son, with Hawthorne's works printed on their backs?" And after graduating from Bowdoin, behold young Hawthorne sniffing no whiffs of old ocean from behind a mast, but returned to Salem and writing, 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 living in such seclusion, too, that even his own fellow citizens in the town where he was born scarcely knew him by sight. Little money, however, came from his magazine articles, even when these were published in book form as Twice Told Tales, and all too soon life unrolled another picture. Nathaniel, now a weigher in the customs house at Boston, measuring coal, salt, and other bulky commodities that came in on foreign vessels, irksome employment, but for 2 years faithfully performed. Thereafter, Nathaniel doing a farm hand's chores at Brook Farm, striving with other earnest thinkers to work out a way for men to lead better and simpler lives. But in 1842 Hawthorne married and settled down in the handsome old manse at Concord. A beautiful place it was, the garden, the woods behind, and the river, to which he often fled to escape from too many visitors, and all his rich life there called forth a book which he named with tender affection, Mosses from an Old Manse. In the years that followed, Hawthorne moved about from place to place, but his powerful romance, The Scarlet Letter, settled once and for all the fact that he was a genius. In a little red wooden house at beautiful Lenox in the Berkshires, he led an idyllic life of peace and joy, happy in the companionship of his wife and their 3 children. Their home stood in the midst of a broad valley that was like a great bowl flooded with golden sunshine. In the center there was a lake, and all around an amphitheater of hills about whose quiet peaks hung delicate purple mists like the softest of airy veils. Here Mr. Hawthorne would lie in the sunshine flecked with the shadows from a tree, and his little Una, Rose, and Julian would climb over him and cover his chin and breast with long grass blades till he looked like Pan, the merry god of the woods, with a verdant woodland beard. He was constantly telling the children stories, too, and entered wholeheartedly into their play, for he was always far more at home with them than with their elders, whom he avoided. At Lenox he wrote his Wonder Book, so loved by generations of children, and his weird old story of Salem, the House of the Seven Gables. In 1853, Hawthorne's college friend, now President Pierce, sent him to Liverpool as American consul, and for 7 years he and his little family lived abroad. While visiting Rome and poking about into all its interesting old corners, or watching the moonlight silver the majestic Colosseum and the arches and fallen columns of the ancient Roman Forum, he made a draft of a wonderful story of Rome to be known as the Marble Faun. When he returned once more to America, Hawthorne went to live at the house called the Wayside in Concord, where he knew Louisa Alcott, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry Thoreau, and all the other interesting Concord people. In that lovely spot he spent the rest of his days. Beautiful things were the children's stories that such a lover of children left to the world. But his novels are made of sterner stuff. They reveal with terrific force the fact that no man can disobey the still small voice in his inmost soul that tells him when he is doing wrong, without the intensest suffering. Headland, Isaac Taylor, American, 1859 through blank. Isaac Taylor Headland has been a missionary and a professor at various universities in China and a lecturer on Chinese art, life, and language in America. Once he heard a Chinese nurse repeating rhymes to a baby and determined to make a collection of Chinese nursery rhymes. A donkey driver who heard him repeating his precious rhyme laughed and told him another one. Headland gave the man 5 cents and promised him as much more for each rhyme he could tell him. Soon he had nurses, drivers, and children all crowding to him to earn 5 cents by telling him nursery rhymes. Inside of a year he gathered 600, many of which are curious counterparts of our own Mother Goose. Hepburn, Thomas N. Gabriel Satoun, Scotch, 1861 through blank. Herford, Oliver, English-American contemporary. Important works, artful antics, whimsical verses. Hogg, James, The Ettrick Shepherd, Scotch, 1770 through 1835. James Hogg was a Scotch shepherd who began to herd cows for a living when he was 7 years old and received for a half-year's wages 1 ewe lamb and a pair of shoes. From his mother and the other shepherds, the boy heard the old border ballads and stories of fairies and giants, but at the age of 20 he still could not write all the alphabet. The remaining letters he studied out from a book in order that he might write down a few simple verses that he had been making. It chanced then that someone recited to him the poem of Tam O'Shanter and told him the story of Burns, the ploughman poet. That was sufficient to make the young shepherd resolve to be likewise a poet. One day, while he was driving his sheep into Edinburgh, he was seized with a sudden desire to see his verses in print. At once he sat down on a stone and scribbled them off on paper. Then he hurried on to a publisher and induced him to put them in print. These ballads attracted the attention of Sir Walter Scott, and through his kindness the Ettrick Shepherd soon gained some renown. But though he now had a farm of his own, he still retained his simple, rough peasant ways. Once he said to Scott, "Ye can never suppose that I belong to your school of chivalry. Ye are the king of that school, but I'm king of the mountain and fairy school, which is far higher than yours." Indeed, his best poems are always of fairies. When he stepped outside that charmed fairy ring, his music and magic vanished. Holland, Josiah Gilbert, American, 1819 through 1881. The founder of Scribner's Monthly, now the Century Magazine. Hood, Thomas, English poet, 1799 through 1845. Howells, William Dean, American, 1837 through 1920. For years the editor of the Atlantic Monthly and founder of that school of writers which portrays commonplace American life. Important works, The Flight of Pony Baker, Christmas Every Day. Ingelow, Jean, English, 1820 through 1897. Important works: Mopsa the Fairy, Stories Told to a Child. End of section 15.